While hair metal is often synonymous with Los Angeles, the city also had a flourishing punk scene that was made up of groups including the Plugs, Alley Cats, the Screamers, the Germs, and today's topic, X. While they were far from the first punk band in LA, X would go on to become one of the most resilient bands over the last 4 decades. Frontwomen Exene Cervenka would tell Loudersound, "We didn't disgrace Los Angeles, that's for sure. We are the soundtrack to Los Angeles, and that is a big deal." Today, let's explore the history of X. 3 of the 4 musicians from the band would hail from Illinois, and it's purely a coincidence since they didn't even know each other as young kids. Bassist and co-vocalist John Doe would find his way to LA sometime in the 70s via Illinois, Maryland, and New York, and Doe saw LA as a place to reinvent himself. He was a fan of old cinema and the novelists that emerged from the city, so it only made sense to migrate there. Meanwhile, guitarist and multi-instrumentalist Billy Zoom was living in LA starting in the 60s and served as a session musician. He would reveal to Rolling Stone that he soon grew ambivalent to the music scene, recalling all the bullshit that popped up in the 70s, all those overproduced, super-processed, oversensitive, were so artsy arena bands. He also saw LA's music scene as being dead and was hungry for something new and raw. Coincidentally enough, Zoom and Doe would place ads in the local newspaper The Recycler the same week, looking for other like-minded musicians. The pair would eventually meet up and form a band. Vocalist Exene Cervenka would also hail from Illinois, but moved to Florida at the age of 13. She would tell the Oklahoma Gazette, "That was the early 60s and girls couldn't even play baseball. I lived out in the middle of nowhere in the country, so there was no chance of starting a band. Everything was in your mind, and it was all about imagining things." Cervenka would take a liking to writing and poetry, and it would be that interest that inspired her to hitch a ride with only $80 in her pocket across the country to LA at the young age of 20. She would take up a job at the Beyond Baroque Foundation in Venice. It was at her place of work at an open mic night for poets where she would meet future bandmate and husband John Doe. She would recall to Rolling Stone, "I was just sitting there and he came down and sat next to me. We were talking and he said, 'You want to go next door to the jazz place and get a drink?' So we did that and he told me about punk." The pair would soon start dating, and Cervenka would attend the band's rehearsals, bringing the song "I'm Coming Over." Cervenka would admit that she never initially dreamed of joining a band when she moved out to LA. Rounding out the lineup would be DJ Bonebreak, and by the late 70s, the classic lineup of X was born. LA served as the perfect backdrop for the group, with Doe telling Loudersound, "Hollywood was in real decline. The Tennessee Williams in me said yes, the perfect moment, be in the heart of the beast when it's falling to pieces." Fueled by alcohol, the band's sound would rely heavily on rockabilly-type guitar hooks. They would release their first single, Adult Books, on local label Danger House, and it was soon after that they caught the attention of former Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek, who read about the band in a local paper and attended one of the group's shows at the Whiskey A Go-Go, the old stomping grounds for his band. It was during that performance at the Whiskey that the band broke into a blistering cover of the Doors song Soul Kitchen. Impressed, Manzarek not only wanted to produce the band, but get them signed to a major label. He would tell the Mercury News, "I saw them and I just fell in love. They were amazing. About the 4th song into the show, they're just wailing on something. My wife Dorothy said to me, 'Do you recognize that one?' I said, 'Honey, I don't know any of these songs.' She said, 'No, listen carefully.' I said, 'Oh my god, it's Soul Kitchen.' They were doing Soul Kitchen at 1,000 miles per hour, he'd recall. Manzarek tried to get the band signed to the Doors' old label Elektra Records, but was unsuccessful at first. The band instead signed with indie label Slash Records, and they would soon hit the studio with Manzarek as producer, and he would also lend a hand playing organ. By this time, X already had enough material for 2 albums, but picked the best 9 songs which would form their impressive 1980 debut, simply titled Los Angeles. Also included was their cover of Soul Kitchen. The band would get noticed by critics, and the album would not just make many best-of-year lists, but also is considered by some to be one of punk's finer moments. X's debut record would end up selling an impressive 100,000 copies in just half a year. Following 2 gigs in San Diego in 1980, Doe and Cervenka would make their relationship official and get hitched. Zoom would recall to Rolling Stone, "They got married in Tijuana the next day in a little Justice of Peace office. I remember I hired a mariachi band to come over and play, and everybody drank a lot of tequila." The leftover tracks from the Los Angeles sessions would find their way onto their 1981 follow-up, Wild Gift. Critics once again praised the band, with Rolling Stone calling the record the best album by an American band this year. Despite the obstacles that stood in the band's way, they would attract legions of fans, but they soon also outgrew their small indie label / records. They would frequently show up at signings or record stores but had no records to sign. The label couldn't keep up with the demand and had supply issues. Manzarek felt that now that the band had some credibility, released a few records, and had built up a following, that Elektra might be interested in X, and they were. The band signed a deal with the label, and for their major label debut, they allotted a whopping $100,000. It would result in the 1982 album Under the Big Black Sun, featuring less punk and more bouncy beats, as exemplified on the opening track Hungry Wolf. The record would be heavily inspired by the death of Cervenka's sister, who would be killed by a drunk driver in Hollywood while she was on her way to an X show. Once again, they charmed critics, but struggled to find a nationwide audience. FM radio just didn't want to touch the band. Manzarek would recall to the Mercury News, "By the time the third album had come out, it was like, God, what's the matter? Radio will not play them. It was very depressing to me because I know how good they were. They're America's best punk rock band." The band would release their follow-up album 1983's less punky, more fun in the new world. The band's first 4 releases all charted in the upper echelons of the Billboard charts, but once again they couldn't quite captivate a nationwide audience. Elektra insisted the band change their sound, incorporating more synths, and try to sound more radio-friendly. They would recommend the band work with producer Michael Wagner, who had worked with Motley Crue, Wasp, and Poison, and the end result would be the commercially and critically disappointing record Ain't Love Grand. Cervenka and Doe would both admit they weren't fans of the album, with Cervenka telling Loudersound, "The worst thing we ever did, and the only regret of my life in terms of my career, was that record." Doe would be a little less critical, telling the same interviewer, "I can't listen to it," and couldn't listen to it fairly soon after doing it because it didn't sound like us. "We thought, what if we tried to marry the metal sound to the punk rock world, but it was a bad idea." It was around 1984 and 1985 that Doe and Cervenka got divorced, but they decided to keep the band going. Doe would tell Rolling Stone, "I felt like our creative partnership was more important, so even though I was hurt and she was hurt, we kept going. She was a friend before she was my wife, and she was still a soulmate when we sing, because we sung together for so long," he'd say. Following the poor performance of Ain't Love Grand, Zoom would leave the band, telling Loudersound, "We hadn't succeeded. I felt like it was time to get a real job." X would continue to release albums during the 80s and early 90s, but none of them would be as well received as the group's first 4 records. The band would go on hiatus several times without officially breaking up, while their members would explore other musical opportunities. It would strangely be enough to show the X-Files, which got guitarist Billy Zoom to rejoin the band. In 1997, the X-Files were gearing up for their first movie, and the studio asked Cervenka and Zoom if they'd be willing to appear in promotional spots for the film. Zoom immediately agreed, as he was a big fan of the show, and Cervenka would recall seeing Zoom after time apart, recalling to Rolling Stone, "He showed up with his silver guitar, his silver jacket, sunglasses on, and his amp, and I just pretty much started crying." During his time outside of X, Zoom had become a born-again Christian, gotten sober, went back to school, and started an amp repair business. In 1997, the band put out a compilation, Beyond and Back, the X Anthology, and according to Zoom, the band had made him an offer he couldn't refuse to rejoin. The band soon hit the road in 1998, with Zoom admitting to Rolling Stone, "On that tour, I made a lot more than the rest of the band and got my way." The band would tour throughout the 2000s and 2010s, but health problems also stopped them several times. Cervenka would admit that she'd been diagnosed and then possibly misdiagnosed with MS, telling an interviewer, "I've had so many doctors tell me I have MS, then some say I don't. I don't even care anymore." Zoom, meanwhile, would undergo treatment for bladder cancer in 2015 before returning to the band later that year. The band recently celebrated their 40th anniversary together with a tour in 2017 and released their first studio album in almost 3 decades with 2020's well-received Alphabet Land. That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like button and subscribe, and we'll see you again on Rock and Roll True Stories. Take care.